Thank you, Senator McCaffrey. Water is a very precious. Water is a very precious commodity. My name is Paul Raselli. I'm going to be representing here today the Burrillville Land Trust as well as the Rhode Island Association of Conservation Commissions. We are in support of Senate Bill 3037. I've submitted some written comments that I would like to go over very briefly. It's this piece of paper that you see in front of you. And during my comments, I'd like to talk about some of the issues that have been raised over the past half hour or so. I think on behalf of the two organizations, and I have a feeling I'll get some questions as we go along, so please go right ahead. Senate Bill 3037 corrects a process that needs correcting. So the EFSB board has 3 members. It's important to remember that while Senator Connolly outlined some of the other ancillary departments within those 3 representatives, some of those sections within those departments are no longer there. And I point you to Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, who sits there as a member of that panel. The Natural Heritage Program, which was part of RIDEM's primary place to go for biodiversity reports, has all but been demised. It's no longer there. Fish and Wildlife has now been given the advisory role, and advisory only, I might add, to weigh in on some of the impacts of this particular project. With the, and I'm referring to one part of this 3037 bill, which is the additional members. It would be great to have a biologist on that panel, because none exist in the state of Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. Fish and Wildlife Management has to do with managing fish and wildlife for game purposes. Also, Water Resources Boards. You got to remember that since it was brought up that this is about a power plant, I feel that it's okay now to mention it. At any point within a day of operation of the power plant, 300 to 400 or more thousand gallons of water will be used. In the application that came out of Invenergy, they talk about a 1-to-1 reduction of the Clear River from the water use that's taken out of the aquifer. Wouldn't it be nice to have a Water Resources Board member on that panel? RIDEM is not the place, the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management is not the place for water resources. That's why it was created. That's why a Water Resources Board was created. Also, it corrects a process that needs correcting because we've gone beyond these mega industrial size power plants. And yet the Energy Facility Siting Board is dealing with a mega 1 gigawatt industrial size power plant in the middle of the woods. When legislation is inconsistent with democratic ideals and fairness, legislation is brought back for review. You do it all the time. This bill is consistent with other state rules and regulations. And Senator Lombardi mentioned, are we going to get to 44-3-1, 44-3? If you look, and I know you have, there are sections within the property subject to taxation that is specific to each and many towns within the state of Rhode Island. Tax treaties notwithstanding, but tax exemptions, tax rules and regulations, protocols for doing this, whatever it is, it's within that body of public laws. This is not inconsistent with that body of public laws. Yes, it does set a precedent. Absolutely. Of course it does. Let's not be shy about saying that. Will it open the door to others? Absolutely. That's why we have a legislature here and a body and a Judiciary committee that can handle these types of things. It's up to you at this point to decide if these things go through. 3037 is not a job killer or an unwelcome business mat slogan. We got to remember that this legislation does nothing about slowing down construction jobs, does nothing when it comes to creating jobs either. States that have both Connecticut and Massachusetts and elsewhere that have both public input at the advisory level, at the EFSB level, and at the tax treaty level flourish with development. We have a 3-member panel. Now, I understand about transparency. I also understand about tax treaties. But there are arguments, good arguments, for having a discussion and taking that discussion about a tax treaty to another level, a level of voter approval, is consistent and in line with democratic ideals. Nobody said it was going to be pleasant. Democracy is messy from the outset. So maybe we can be a little messier. And we can't get too far from just a few years ago. Voters in Newport were allowed to vote whether or not a casino and essentially a tax deal was going to come to their town. Now, I present this before you, that if the voters in Newport are allowed to vote for a casino in the middle of America's finest tourist attraction and best place to live, can't the voters in Burrillville vote on a tax treaty for an industrial-sized power plant in the middle of the woods? At the EFSB level, all of those opinions are advisory only, whether they come from interveners. Having more members on the board shifts responsibility a little bit more. This idea that this is a not in my backyard disappeared with the Resilient Rhode Island Act. The Resilient Rhode Island Act eliminated not in my backyard statewide. And I'd like to make just a couple of other comments about some of the other things I heard earlier. One of them is infrastructure. It might be important for you to know that while this may be the perfect place for a fracked gas-fired power plant, it's not exactly the ideal place because of the other infrastructure that has to be put in. National Grid will tell you that they have to put in a 6.8-mile long 345K line along an existing corridor. There'll be construction of a new switch yard, a new gas line, a new access road.
Senator Nesselbush, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Yes, ma'am.
Done, sir.
Sir,
Senator,
are
go
you?
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you aware of another location in the state that wouldn't require that kind of infrastructure? I mean, I asked that of
They all would.
Mr. Sabatoni.
They all would. The idea is that this is not just because the gas line, a major gas line, not a I want to say tributary, but it's not a tributary, a connection line. Absolutely, there's a main line that goes through it.
But, sir, you're kind of saying don't do this in Burrillville because you're going to have to build a 6.8. I mean, as you just said, you're going to have to build that anywhere, so that's not exactly a reason not to do it in Burrillville because it would have to go anywhere.
Whether it should be in Burrillville or not, that wasn't my contention at all. The idea that this tax treaty, this is not about the power plant. This is voter approval. But there was a comment here making
a slippery slope.
The extent. There was a comment here about infrastructure, that all the infrastructure is there. That's not correct. In Woonsocket, it's a lot closer to get to the Sherman Road substation than it is building a 6.8-mile line across an existing corridor. There's a sewage treatment plant right next door. There's roads. There's the Walnut Hill Plaza is a beautiful, I think, 55-acre place that's asphalt mostly and a couple of abandoned stores that's right next to a gas line. So there are, but this is not about that. And there are other infrastructure that has to be built and transported. There's a 2 million gallon oil tank that has to be built there. The oil has to come from someplace and transported. So don't think that this is the perfect place. It's not the perfect place. There are other places, but this bill has nothing to do with the power plant. And lastly, the idea of leveraging a town's tax treaty. The way I understand tax treaties, I'm sure senators here will remind me later on, is to entice companies to come to a particular place. You want to get out there and offer roads, infrastructure development, perhaps a reduction of this, increase of that. We didn't ask for this. This was put upon us. No, I shouldn't say us, but this was put upon the town of Burrillville and the state of Rhode Island. Those are my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you.